everyone. Welcome to another Ashram Talks session. We're very excited to continue chapter 4 today with verse 17, joined by mental health counselor and Bhakti yoga practitioner Abhimanyu Wolf. Welcome again, Abhimanyu.
Thank you so much for having me, Sienna.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. I know we're a few minutes late today, so whenever you're ready, we can get started.
Yes, I will get right into it and offer my prayers to our spiritual preceptors so that this may be a very auspicious and fruitful discussion for all of us. Sakshad haritvena samasta shastra ruktastata bhavyateva sadbhi kintu prabhoya priyeva tasya vande guru shri charanarvindam. Yasya prasadad bhagavat prasada yasya prasada nagati kutopi dhyayanstu vangstasya yashastri sandhyam vande guru shri charanarvindam. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanang pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Alright, and so today we have the fortune of resuming our discussion on Bhagavad Gita. We're on the 4th chapter, verse 17 today, continuing the discussion on different types of karma, different types of action. Here Krishna tells Arjuna, Karmano hyapi bodhavyang chavikarmana, akarmanascha bodhavyang, gahana karmano gati. The intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. And so there are a few different contexts that one could look at this verse through. There's the, maybe a more, you could say, colloquial or modern day lens of viewing it, and there's maybe the more traditional way of viewing karma as they described it in the Vedas. And so first I'll go into how they discuss it in the Vedas and then get a little bit more into what that might look like for us practically. So when they're talking about karmas here, oftentimes they are referring to people's role within the varnashram system, basically. Is somebody, if somebody's acting as a celibate monk, if they're a married man, if they're in the renounced order of life, or if they're in the let's say blue collar or labor class, are they one of the Vaishyas, one of the administrators, or one of the teaching or priestly classes, then the expectation is one does your karma, one acts within that role, and karma often it had sort of an expectation of worshiping various demigods and demigoddesses within the Vedic pantheon, who we understand to be parts of the universal form of the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna. And so action in that context referred to doing one's sort of religious prescribed duties in carrying out one's occupation and in worshiping the gods in accordance with the Vedas. And then forbidden action would be anything that went against the Vedic prescriptions. Like in modern day terms, that would be things like eating meat, intoxication, extramarital affairs, gambling, and so basically sinful activities, to put it in that context. And I know that there have been other podcasts here on Ashram Talks about what exactly is sin, how do we define it. Ultimately, in the truest sense, it's anything that goes against our eternal spiritual welfare. So that could be considered vikarmana, or forbidden action, that which goes against the Vedas. And then inaction is to not perform your prescribed action, which there's a slight nuance there. It's not that you're performing sinful action, but you're not performing the karmas or the prescribed religious duties. And then of those who don't perform those different karmas, those different prescribed religious duties, then there were a few divisions. Some was that, there may be people who just weren't well versed in the Vedas, or they were aware of it but just did not want to perform it. Then there were those who realized that, okay, all of this worship of demigods and demigoddesses and things, ironically, even though this is written in the scripture, this is written in scriptures that were predominated by the lower modes, the modes of passion and ignorance. And so just because it's written in some portion of scripture, that doesn't mean it's actually in my eternal welfare. Again, some of the scriptures are written in a very gradual progression for people who maybe are not seeking their eternal welfare, or maybe are not ready to pursue it yet. And so I'm not going to perform all of these, so-called religious activities. I'm going to really seek self-realization. So ironically, when it talks about inaction in this context, it's referring to people not getting caught up in all these nitty-gritty details of various religious injunctions that were in the scripture, and actually thinking deeply about, okay, well, what is my best interest in terms of self-realization? I don't want to follow something in, I don't want to blindly follow something that's written in scripture without considering if this is what's meant for my upliftment, or if this is meant for people who are not wanting to be sort of uplifted from material entanglement. Some parts of scriptures are almost written for people who are sort of wanting to stay entangled in this material world and just enjoy it in different ways. So another type of inaction, as they're, or akarma, as they're describing it here, is those who would renounce their Vedic duties or their varnashram duties to pursue a higher calling, to pursue self-realization. And then a third type, and this is actually described by Srila Narayan Maharaj in his Bhagavad Gita commentary to this verse. He says that those on the path of devotion who, by hearing the glories of Krishna again and again, if I remember the verse, tavat karmani kurivita yavanirvit yavata matkata shravanadova, and I'm forgetting the final line of the verse, but he quotes Sri Krishna's, the Uddhava Gita, Sri Krishna's conversation with his dear devotee Uddhava, where Krishna tells Uddhava that some people, after having developed a great taste for hearing about me and chanting my transcendental glories, they lose their interest in performing all of these different Vedic rites, because again, they realize that a lot of the Vedic rites were, they're not in connection with the soul proper. They're basically in connection with the mind. They're in connection with the body, and this speaks to the essential need to hear the Vedic scriptures, to hear books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam from a pure devotee. Because sometimes, even in our endeavor to, to strive for self-realization, even in our endeavor to study scripture on our own, sometimes we may miss the essence of it. We may get a totally wrong idea. Like, for example, in the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada, in various places, he'll talk about Varnashram Dharma. He'll talk about the legitimate importance of it. Srila Prabhupada does. Srila Narayan Maharaj in his commentary, he also has purports discussing the importance of following Varnashram Dharma and encouraging the youth of this age to accept it, to really get in touch with what is our, psychophysical nature, so to speak, so that we can be in a good position for self-realization. At the same time, though, if we sort of get maybe fixated on those parts of our Acharya's teachings, we may miss the essence of what they came to give and get caught up in the externals of, the scriptures. So the Acharyas, they try to steer our attention to, to the main thing, which is hearing and chanting about Krishna. And throughout these books, they encourage us to, to hear the signs of Krishna consciousness from pure devotees. I know in this particular purport, Srila Prabhupada says that one has to learn the signs from Krishna himself or from one who is self-realized, and that is as good as learning from Krishna himself. And so when it talks about akarma, or inaction in this verse, it can also refer to one who, again, just by hearing and chanting about Krishna, by developing that relationship with him, by having a sense of sweetness, of recognizing how sweet and loving Krishna is, and developing that desire to meet him personally one day, by hearing about him and hearing about him, then, you know, one can give up the sort of externally driven injunctions of the scriptures, of the Vedas, and they can dedicate themselves exclusively to devotional service, to the aspects of the scriptures that focus on devotional service. And it doesn't mean that they reject or consider that the Vedic scriptures are false, or that the portions of the Vedic scriptures that have these maybe more materialistic injunctions for karma, the devotee doesn't criticize those parts of the Vedic scripture or say that they're false. They just recognize that they're written for people of, various predominations of the modes of material nature. So that's, the more classical view of what's being talked about in this verse in terms of action, forbidden action, and inaction. And then, true to the title of that I gave this talk, Be Do Have, the path for inspired action for the spiritual seeker. The concept of Be Do Have, it's actually something I got from my father. He is he's very fond of Bhagavad Gita. He has a very deep love for it. He does a lot of transformative work with people. He does communication seminars and life coaching, and he is also a long-time practitioner of bhakti yoga. And so the idea of be, do, have is first to focus on our sense of identity. Who am I? And then from that state of being, naturally, I'll, then, the doing will come forth. And then I'll have what that kind of person has. For example, on the negative side, if somebody's telling myself, "Oh, I'm just such a terrible person. I'm just such a terrible person," then naturally, if I believe I'm a terrible person, if that's who I am, then I'm going to do what a terrible person does, and I'm going to have what a terrible person has. If I tell myself, "Oh, I'm so selfish. I'm so selfish," then ironically, that sort of shame, that sort of self-disparagement, it's going to drive me to do what a selfish person does, and then I'm going to have what a selfish person has. I'm going to have the kind of finances a selfish person has. I'm going to have the kinds of relationships a selfish person has, and so on. Finances, relationships, the kind of fun, the kind of emotional state that a selfish person has. If that's what I keep telling myself, if that's what I believe about myself, then that's how it's going to be. And another thing to consider with this paradigm of be, do, have is sometimes we get it mixed up. Sometimes we think, okay, well, I want to be happy. And so I'm going to do these, if I can just have certain things, or if I can just do certain things, then I'll be happy. And, we don't realize the sort of logical fallacy that a lot of the things that we think we need to do, or that we think we need to have in order to be happy, are not intrinsically tied with happiness. So, some of these are classic examples. Again, easiest one is, well, if I have enough money, I'll be happy. And usually in our mind, if we think about it, maybe we might even be able to put a dollar amount. If I've reached this dollar amount, I would be happy. And so, if we look at it more objectively, we can all think of people who have that dollar amount, maybe who have far eclipsed that dollar amount by thousands, by hundreds of thousands, by hundreds of millions. There are people who have those dollar amounts and are not happy, or at the very least are not consistently happy. And we can also think of people who do not have that dollar amount. They may be far below it, but they find some very deep happiness, wisdom, and joy in their life. And if we're really honest, we can probably look at times in our own life where we've not had that dollar amount and have been happy. Maybe we weren't in touch with why we were happy, but if we really look at it carefully, we can recognize that I don't need to have this thing in order to be happy. That state of being happiness, it's something more inherent to the soul, and it's not directly tied with any external thing that we have. Similarly, sometimes it's a doing. Okay, there's maybe if I just reach this accomplishment, if I get this gold medal, if I get this job, if I get this degree, then I'll be happy. I'll be popular. I'll be content. And again, we can think of people who have reached those accomplishments, who have gotten those degrees, who have gotten those jobs, who weren't happy. And it's not to say that those having those things or doing those things wouldn't be meaningful for us. It's not even to say that it couldn't bring us at least some sense of satisfaction or happiness, but there's no guaranteeing that it would. It's not, again, those things are not intrinsically tied with happiness. It's not do have be, it's not do be have, it's not have be do, it's be do have. That in the most fundamental sense, what we're doing and what we're having is sort of emanating from our state of being, from our identity, from our yeah, basically from our state of being. So it's important to look at, who am I, or at the very least, who do I think that I am? Who am I telling myself that I am? Because ultimately, if I am happy, and I recognize that my happiness is not intrinsically tied with any external thing I'm doing or having, if that's my state of being, I'm going to start doing what a happy person does and having what a happy person has, the kind of relationships they have, the kind of experience of life that they have. I'm going to start seeing the things that a happy person sees. And so part of it is sort of a conscious choice. It's a recognition of, no, let me get in touch with that happiness that's natural for my soul and let my doing come forth from there. Rather than get caught in the anxiety of, well, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to have this first, then I can relax. No, let me be a relaxed, happy person as much as I can. Let me get in touch with that side of my spiritual nature, and let me sort of naturally be inspired to action from that place of happiness. Because again, action is natural for the soul. If the question comes, well, what if I just don't, if I was already happy, would I really want to do anything? And it's only natural. The soul is considered Satchidananda. We have that Kriya Shakti in the soul. It's just natural for the soul to be active, whether we're in a happy or an unhappy state. We always have desires. We always have things that we want to do. And so it's not that, well, if I allow myself to be happy, I won't desire anymore. I won't be productive. No, it's quite the opposite. That generally, when we are content, when we are happy, we may find that we're more motivated. We're not, rather than feeling crushed, we could be in the same situation, but find genuine desires of what we want, rather, what we're wanting to move towards, rather than what we're maybe wanting to run from. And so this is the way that we can really become inspired to discover what we want and want to move forward, to get in touch with, no, again, as a soul, as a particle of spiritual energy, ultimately of Krishna's energy. Naturally, I am eternal. I'm full of knowledge, and I'm full of bliss. I naturally emanate and seek love, and so let me act. Let me be driven to action from that awareness. And then to tie that in with the bhakti yoga perspective, the perspective of a practitioner of Krishna consciousness, that state of being goes a little bit deeper. It's not even just who I am, but who I am in relation to Krishna. And this is very key in our devotional practices, even when it comes to devotional acts like studying the Bhagavad Gita, chanting japa, engaging in congregational glorification of Radha and Krishna. This sense of being, this sense of who I am, is also very critical. That first, there's three concepts in the Vedic literatures, namely Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojan, or you could say Sambandha, Sadhana, and Sadhya. And so first comes Sambandha. First, and the Bhagavad Gita, among the Vedic scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita focuses a lot on what's known as Sambandha Gyan, knowing our relationship with the Supreme Lord, our relationship with this material world, and even knowing this material energy's relationship with the Supreme Lord, and knowing who each of those three entities are. Who am I? Who is Krishna? And who and what is this material energy, Maya? And so the more we understand this topic very carefully, the more we understand, okay, I'm an eternal particle of spiritual energy. I'm an eternal servant to Krishna. I have an eternal loving relationship with him. I have the potential to serve him in one of the 5 primary rasas of neutrality, servitude, friendship, parental love, or conjugal love. And then who is Krishna? He's the absolute truth, the cause of all causes. He's the source of, the Sarva Shaktiman, the source of all energies, all spiritual energies, all material energies, even us living entities. We're parts of his spiritual energy ultimately. And he is Rasabdin. He is an ocean of loving spiritual mellows, as they're called, or loving spiritual ways of having loving relationships. So this is who Krishna is, just in a nutshell. And what is this material nature? It's the external energy of Krishna for living entities who want to be away from him. Then this material energy, it allows for that opportunity. It covers our awareness of our spiritual nature, so that we can try to enjoy with a false sense of egoism. And so this false sense of I, this false sense of being, this first of all, it leads us into material consciousness. And even when we're trying to engage in spiritual activities and devotional activities, if we're engaging in these devotional activities with a false sense of self, I'm a man, I'm an American, I'm 23 years old, I'm of this particular family, I'm a really amazing person, I'm a really terrible person. Again, all this I, all these senses of false ego. If it's with this type of egoism that I'm chanting the holy names of Krishna, that I'm reading Bhagavad Gita, then ironically my devotional practice will simply feed that form of ego rather than spiritually uplift me. And so it's key that from the beginning of my devotional practice that I sort of center myself and remember that no, I'm an eternal spiritual being. I need to let go of all these upadis. I know before doing worship of the deities and before chanting the Gayatri mantras, devotees will often chant the verse, Naham vipro nachitnarapatir napi vaishuna shudro, Nahang varni nachagrahapatir no vanasto yatirva, Kintu brodyan nikila paramananda purnamritabdher, Gopi bhartu parakamalayar, Dasa dasa anudasa. That Naham vipro nachanarapatir napi vaishuna shudro. I'm not a Brahmana, I'm not a Kshatriya, I'm not a Vaishya, I'm not a Shudra. So I'm not a super intellectual person, I'm not a priestly person, I'm not a warrior, I'm not a businessman, I'm not a laborer, I'm not any of these divisions of social class. Naham varni nachagraha patir no vanastoya tirva. I'm not a householder, I'm not a renunciate, I'm not any of these. I'm not any of these material designations. So if we're clearing out the material designations and saying I'm not any of these things, even if my external psychophysical nature leans towards one of those, but I'm recognizing that I, as the soul, this may be my nature according to the three modes in this lifetime, but that's not who I am. So who am I? Kintu prodyan nikila paramananda purnamritabdher, gopi bhartu parakamalayar, dasa dasa nudasa. That I am the servant of the servant of the servant of the maintainer of gopis, who is the embodiment of complete nectar and of complete ecstasy, complete bliss and love. So that's who I am. Spiritually speaking, I'm the servant of the maintainer of the gopis, of that supremely blissful and nectarian personality. And so this is a mantra we commonly chant, and again, it's one of those things we chant it again and again to sort of remind us that, yeah, this is who I am, and it's from this sense of real ego, this sense of I-ness or being, that I'm meant to perform my devotional practice. And the more we really remember this and deeply meditate on this and come to this understanding, then our devotional practices will sort of serve to awaken our spiritual nature. So it's very important in terms of be, do, have, beyond just, you know, our material identity of sort of being authentic. It's also getting in touch with our spiritual state of being, with that state of consciousness, and letting our actions come forth from there. That, yeah, let me do whatever I'm doing with my best endeavor to please the senses of Sri Krishna. Let me do what I can. Let me try my best to do what Sri Krishna would want me to do, and to do what my spiritual master and my spiritual teachers would want me to do. So I think I will stop there for today. I'm seeing there are a couple of messages in the chat. Let's see. Colleen said, thank you very much, Colleen. Um, And so, yeah, it's a little discussion on.
Thank you so much, Abhimanyu. My camera isn't working, unfortunately. Not sure what's going on with that, but if you want to, feel free to conclude, summarize a little bit today. Yeah, any last thoughts you'd like to share, and then we can, yeah, we can finish up for the day. Sorry, I'm not.
Okay, okay. So, yeah, in terms of final thoughts, another, maybe colloquial consideration for this verse in terms of action and inaction is just in a very basic sense, we can look at, decisiveness and indecisiveness. That I think in one of the Gita verses, maybe coming up, it talks about seeing action in inaction and seeing inaction in action. And one of the more common ways I see that is between decisiveness and indecisiveness, that I often work with my clients on recognizing that indecision is very much a decision. That when we remain inactive, perhaps we're in inertia, we're afraid of making a decision, so we just don't decide. That is very much a decision, and every decision has its consequences. But generally, indecision is a decision we make sort of unconsciously. We're just sort of waiting for events to unfold, kind of waiting for it to come at us. And so I work with people on taking responsibility for the choice to be indecisive, the decision for indecision. And so, in that inaction or indecisiveness, it's an action. It is a choice. And then as far as seeing inaction in action, that even sometimes again when we're maybe we're just kind of running around trying to check off everything on our to-do list. Sometimes it's sort of like we're just being driven. We're just being pulled by external obligations, external forces, all kinds of fears, and we're not really being active as a conscious entity, as a soul. We're not really consciously choosing. Okay, well, yeah, what's actually in my integrity here? What are my values here? So even though I'm being very active and I'm being very busy, I may be almost lazy in a certain sense of prioritizing what needs to be prioritized. So that's just something for us to keep in mind for our personal development, to actually be consciously at choice for whether we're choosing to be active or inactive. And then, yeah, from the devotional perspective, doing our best to actually be active in the service of Krishna, recognizing that I am his eternal servant, and that even my psychophysical nature is not who I am as a spirit soul. It's just, my it's just my psychophysical conditioning for this lifetime. So, with that, any last questions or comments? No worries. Thanks so much.